Check 1 2. Check 1 2.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me okay? Back? All right. So welcome to the Yates County Candidate Forum. Before we start, I've got a couple of administrative announcements. So the emergency exits, everybody's kind of skewed this way. So there's that entry right here, and then 2 exits marked in the back. I'll go through the gray doors. That's another room. So we'll go outside. All right. Before everything, cell phones. Vibrate, mute, off. Everybody should get a straw ballot, so to fill out before we leave, and then we've got the basic schedule on the reverse side. And just to let you know that we're live streaming today, so audience to forum or think accordingly or whatever. Okay, I'm your moderator. I'm Bill Roby. I'm representing the Yates County Democratic Committee, who's the forum sponsor. Left to right, Linda Andre, Max Delafia, Ian Golden, Tracy Matrano, and unfortunately, Eddie Sunquist is the 5th candidate, and he's unable to make it today because of a family emergency. So our purpose today is that you may have heard that there's an important election going on in November, and that there's a Democratic primary on June 26th. As a result of that primary, one of these candidates, or Eddie, will be chosen to take on the current incumbent. Today, we want to help inform your decision as you make your choice. I'm going to explain a little bit about the format of the formal session today. We have 2 main segments. The first segment is 30 minutes long, or 20 minutes long, plus intermediate time. Each candidate's going to have 5 minutes to give a statement. We felt like a lot of times at these forums, they're not given enough time to make a coherent statement. So we want to give them a chance to get what they want to say out before we get into questions and answers. So hopefully we can go crisply into that. And they're free to talk about whatever they please. There's no stipulations, and the order was chosen randomly. So they didn't know whether they'd be first, second, or whatever. The second portion will be about 50 minutes long. We're going to cover 5 topic areas: gun violence, healthcare, agriculture and people, environment, national security and trade. The committee developed 17 questions as a question bank and gave them to the candidates last week so that they could prepare. Today we'll cover 2 of those questions per topic for a total of 10. The candidates do not know which 2 in each topic area we're going to cover, nor in which order they're going to respond. To speed things along, only 2 candidates will respond to each question, and federally as well as nationwide. We're all first-time political office potentials here, and I think that also is a reflection of how engaged people are. So my name is Ian Golden. I'm a small business owner and a dad and a husband from Tompkins County. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania on the eastern border of Lancaster County. Most of my, I would say, experiences are really, and I think really what shaped me are rooted in rural America, and what really reflect, I think, a lot of this district. As many of my classmates were engaged in vocational trades, they wore college tracks. Future Farmers of America were really strong with my school. We had teachers that were often absent on the first day of hunting season, and probably the wealthiest person in my family, in my social network, was a family of roofers. And so I think that really speaks to where I come from and the way I see. I'm thankful for this opportunity. As a candidate, the issues that we'll talk about tonight, some of the topics that are important to us that we'll get into, it's important to know that I'm one of, I think, the only candidates where these aren't just ideologies or platforms that we've developed for an election. These are topic areas that I've literally walked the walk instead of just talking about it. Only candidate is a small business owner where I've created jobs in upstate New York and done all I can to pay living wages. Two of us, individuals who can both access and afford it, and for those who can't. As a I see the policies that were put out by Tom Reed and fellow Republicans this past year that would treat my wife and my younger daughter as pre-existing conditions, and if we lost access to health insurance or could otherwise unafford it, we'd be in really tough shape. On the top, I've walked this walk as well. I'm the only candidate that was out there on the front line, so to speak, knocking on doors to try to keep hydraulic fracturing out of our communities. And this was before any intent to run for political office. My wife and I, the little savings that we had, we made the investment in the Black Oak Wind Farm, which was in Enfield in Tompkins County, to really try to get behind moving toward a more renewable energy system. These things are really important to me. The reason I'm here, like many, I really reached a tipping point. For me, it was at one of Representative Reed's town halls, just sitting there watching a masterful, well-groomed politician work the room, taking questions without really answering any questions, having the very emotional and passionate concerns of the audience take it outside and spin it back into the media. These were just liberal extremists that were in from Ithaca, regardless of where he is from in the district. And I'm done with that model. I've got two daughters. I'm really concerned about their future, whether it be the environment, whether it's loss of economic opportunity, whether it's the divisiveness in our communities. You know, some of the 90-year-olds that I talk to in this process across the district, they say they've never experienced a time in our nation where it's felt this divided and they were this concerned. And I'm not okay with this being what I'm leaving to my kids. And so I could sit back and, I could worry about it, I could complain about it in my own silo, my own bubble, or I could step up and really try to do something about it, be the change. And I didn't want to look back and say there was something more that I could have done. And so I'm doing all that I can with all of you here to be the change, to bring new ideas, fresh faces. I'm not here to rise up through a party or just follow a party line. I'm done with politicians who are corrupted, interest rather than constituents in their district, not having a backbone. I'm going to give you an honest alternative to what we have now, and I'll do all I can to work with you collectively to make a change. So who's ready to make a change? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ian. Next up is Max Delapia.
Can you hear me? My name is Max Delapia. I live in Tioga County, Owego. My wife and I, Nancy, been married 33 years, have 3 adult children, 2 grandchildren, and 1 on the way. Nancy's on baby watch. 5th of June, she's heading over to England. So we're excited about that. This is a high participated in making this possible. Thank you all. It's a tribute to you. It shows that you have hope for the future. And I believe that hope for the future resides in any one of us. I'm very proud to be part of this group. Any one of us would be worlds better than our current representative. And I'm proud to be a member of this group. So how many have heard me speak in the past? Okay, a bunch of you. So I'm just going to say briefly, I'm the only veteran in the group, 30 plus years in the Air Force, and leadership and team building I think is important as a broadening experience for any representative. Also, it allows me to relate to people across the district, regardless of their party, and that's important because we're going to need people from all parties to take part in giving Tom Reed the send-off he needs to leave Washington. I would also say that I am the only one who has experienced working issues in Congress. I was a Brookings Fellow for Senator Carl Levin for a year on his personal staff and worked for the Secretary and Chief of Staff of the Air Force and Air Force Senate liaison. That's important, not because, as we know, doesn't necessarily mean you win if you're the best qualified, does it? Otherwise, we might not have... Who? Yeah, Tom Reed. Who else? Okay. To look at Tom Reed and what he has done and what has he done. He's worked to put forth policies that are diametrically opposed to your best interests. What do I mean by that? First of all, let's just look at Affordable Care Act. Anybody heard what his family business is? That's right. And what's the largest source of personal bankruptcy in the nation? Medical debt. What a coincidence. He was very excited to do that before he even looked to see how it would be graded by the Congressional Budget Office. But he talked about repeal and replace. Did he really have a replacement? No. Did he care? No. Say it again. No. You're right. He didn't care. I care about health care. I think it is not a privilege. It is a right. And it should be Medicare for all. And we can talk about that more later, and I'm sure we will. Next, let's talk about Yates County. If you look at the data, you will find that on average, 39% of the people in this county actually are, if not below the poverty level, certainly below what is required to comfortably pay their debts and pay for their food and all the things that happen in a household. So when you look at the Farm Bill, which he voted for, he was taking aim at what? SNAP, or what some people call food stamps. That's $1.40 per person, per meal, per day. They also wanted to increase the work requirements, even though there are some already. They wanted to make it so. That's wrong, it's inhumane, and I will fight for people who need help from their federal government. And last but not least, we need to think about the tax reform package, that Trojan horse that they're bringing in, that the Koch brothers are getting their pay back. Anything that can undermine Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, anything that looks like health care for all, reduce taxes on the upper 1% of corporations, that's what they're trying to do. And within 48 hours, Paul Ryan said we might have to cut social programs to pay for their $1.5 trillion program. And I will fight that in special interest. That's why I'm running. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Next is Linda Andre.
Thank you. Can you hear me? First of all, I would like to thank Yates County Democratic Committee for the opportunity to speak today, and I'd like to thank all of you here for your civic involvement. So what are we discussing today, and why does it really matter? Is it the fate of our district? Is it the fate of our country? Is it the fate of our planet? I believe we are at a crossroad. Today we are facing new challenges, new opportunities, and the choices we make in November will have reverberations for years to come and generations to come. So we must analyze and ponder. We must wrestle with difficult questions. We must weigh the alternatives, but ultimately, we must choose. The choice in November will be between advancing a new technological age, a new cultural age, a new age of human growth and understanding of our place on this planet, or go backward, overcome with fear and division, cowering in a place where confusion reigns and men and women face off in a zero-sum game of winners and losers. We have come very far as a nation, but we have made mistakes, and these are seen as consequences we recognize in the suffering of Native Americans and the lingering effects of slavery. We have witnessed great technological advances that have improved the lives of many, but at the same time brought consequences, damage to our planet. In November, we again have an opportunity to choose, to decide we are a nation of people who together are able to learn from our past, build a better future for ourselves and our children. A nation of people who choose to care for the most vulnerable amongst us, our children and the elderly. To embrace the diversity that strengthens our culture and gives us a new way of seeing. A nation that has the courage to accept our mistakes and move on with the rest of the world to solve the problems of global warming, poverty, domestic and international violence, and embrace technological advances in a way that benefits all of us. A nation that recognizes we are part of a bigger picture on a small planet. A people who can lead in the understanding of our common humanity. I spent 30 years practicing medicine, intimately involved in the lives of others. Those people gave me trust. They entrusted their when they had a relationship with me as their physician. I have seen people at their worst, suffering pain, loss, fear, and anger as they face illness. And I have sat with their families in both the joy at recovery and the grief of sudden and sometimes prolonged death. It has been a struggle for me in the hallowed halls of medicine, where the doors were closed to a girl from a working class family. I dared to dream, however, of becoming a doctor. And it is that struggle and journey with thousands of patients that brings me here today. I never imagined I would be standing in front of you as a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives. But it is the breadth, depth of education, leadership, experience, and struggle that has prepared me for this. We are facing an emergency. Our democracy is at stake. We must have the courage to fight for our core values and the compassion to love our fellow humans. When we look at our government today, we are jolted awake to see a system that is sick and broken, a government that has lost its way from its true mission, that is to protect and empower its citizenry. It is now showing us privileges profits over people, power over progress, and divides us in ideological camps pitted one against the other. Now is the time to heal. Now is the time to believe we can recover. Now is the time to make those difficult choices. I stand before you today, ready to take on those challenges, ready to listen to the pain and suffering of the people in this district, and ready to respond with dedication, determination, and passion to help heal and serve our country. Thank you for your attention.
Bill, I can actually take it. I'll just afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this occasion to meet with you and to speak here today. You will pardon that I'm using my computer. I just spent the weekend in North Carolina where my younger son graduated college, so I've been traveling and I just pulled together ideas and I want to be sure that I'm keeping on track. My name is Tracy Matrano and I'm a lifelong resident of Western and Southern Tier, New York. Professionally, I am an educator of family, social, and internet policy. As an attorney, I worked in corporate law as well as in assigned counsel in Tompkins County Family Court. As an administrator, director of IT policy at Cornell, I reached across the aisle of 14 separate colleges, deans and vice presidents, constituents to facilitate the formulation framework of IT policy that became a model for colleges and universities around the country. More recently, I created a public-private partnership, a cybersecurity certificate program for the University of Massachusetts. And as an entrepreneur, I formed a successful consultancy with clients that included a .org, largely funded by Microsoft, and the New York Public Library. I am running to put people first. Do you have the wireless? How about if I just do this? Does that do the trick? We got it. Okay. I want to challenge the neglect of the current congressional leadership and bring opportunity to this district. I'm running for people like Isabel Leon Morales, who is not here, but she is a friend of mine and a friend of many people in this community. Many years ago, more than 2 decades, her husband and she came over to the United States. They have lived in this community. They have 3 children born here, one who has finished college, one who's about to finish, and one who is poised to do so. Last June, her husband was picked up on a questionable stop by a state trooper. He then spent from June until a Mennonite dairy farmer who, together with his extended family and other members of their community, helped to rebuild Mary Howell and Klaus Martin's barn when it burned down last year. Mr. Zimmerman is now caught in the crunch of a high dollar which guts his ability to sell milk on the global market. Producers who are not treating him fairly, and government regulators who used to be on mute. Tom Reed has done nothing to help him or the hundreds of other small dairy farmers in our district. In fact, Tom Reed, as others mentioned, voted for the farm bill that the House failed to pass last week. Thank heavens. Among other serious faults, it would have resulted in probably 1 million people being thrown off of SNAP, a grave concern for a district that has on average about 40% of its children in free and reduced lunch. I am running for Scarlett Emerson. I saw her walk in. Where are you now, Scarlett? There you are, dear. A friend and fellow parishioner whom I met when I first went to St. Mark's in 2003. Under this Republican administration, she rightfully worries about her Medicare and Social Security, especially in the aftermath of the tax cuts, which now have left that $1.5 trillion that the Republicans, Tom Reed, Paul Ryan, are licking their chops to get at. Tom Reed and Paul Ryan don't deserve your money. For decades, people like you and Scarlett have worked tirelessly for other people in this district, for people such as Isabel and Titus Zimmerman, as well as for the fruit and the vegetable farmers and the workers in this county. Isn't it time she had a representative that had her back? As citizens of a democratic republic, I believe that we have freedom with responsibility. We pay taxes and expect to get returns in terms of government services, not to fill the already overflowing coffers of the 1%. Healthcare, education, infrastructure, environmental conservation are the services we rightfully expect. Those services provide the foundation for innovation, entrepreneurship, capital, and private investment. I want to see my friends Chris and Lindsay, who operate, Chris did, Lindsay now operates the coffee shop on Main Street. I want to see them thrive. How about Jeff and Kathy, owners of Morgan Marina? I want to see them thrive. And it is a century businesses. It's exactly these areas that Congressman Reed has neglected. And I'm running to correct those wrongs, to put people first and bring jobs and justice to the 23rd District. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's actually very efficient. Good job. All right, so the next portion is the question and answer. As I mentioned, we have 5 topics. Each candidate that I say the candidates are going to respond. Each of them will have 2 minutes, and then we'll have any rejoinders after that. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the first topic area is gun violence. So it's gun violence is certainly a hot button topic after recent high-profile shootings, but it's also been with us for quite some time. So we have 2 questions. The first question, responders will be Linda, and then Max. All right. So HR 38 passed by the House in December of 2017. The House added a provision for concealed carry reciprocity among states to the Senate bill that dealt with improving the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, also known as NICS. The Senate has not approved the amended bill yet. And as an aside, New York does not currently recognize concealed carry from any other state. So the question is, what is your position on HR 37, and what can be done, should be done with respect to background checks and reciprocity? Linda, you're up.
Hey, can I just
Sit at your-
sit here and talk to you all? Okay, well, it's an interesting bill because it does what a lot of these bills do. It has something good and something bad. So we started off with the good part, which is NICS, National Instant Criminal Background Check System, and then NARA, which addresses domestic abuse and violent prevention. And then gets tacked onto that, this HR 38, where all you need is a valid ID, a permit to carry a concealed weapon, and you can go from state to state with your weapon. You can also possess a firearm in a school zone with this. You can possess a handgun in a federal land that's open to the public. I think it's outrageous. I think it's wrong. I think that we should definitely not pass this. We should clean up our bills so that they're simple, they're straightforward, and there's no confusion. So this particular bill is taking good stuff and adding bad, so I am totally against it.
I too am against it, but Tom Reed's not. He's never met a gun bill that he didn't like. So what's it do? It is a race to the bottom. Any state, even a state that doesn't have a requirement for anything other than you being a person to have a concealed carry, you would have the right in this state and all other states under this bill to just come in and just carry your gun, open carry, no problem. It also has provisions that would create a legal, how could you say? You would have a case in civil court for damages against a law enforcement officer that stopped you. And that is absurd. But like I said, Tom Reed, anything that has a gun on it, that NRA supports, he's 100% for it. And that's part of why I'm running. Special interests are a domestic threat to the Constitution. And certainly NRA is one of them. And I pledge not to take any NRA funds. And I'm in favor of several types of gun control. And I'd be happy to discuss those later if we have time. I guess I have a couple seconds here. So I would like national background checks without exception. I would like to have some protections for kids in their homes where they have a possibility of unsupervised access to weapons. I think there are no place for bump stocks. And we need to have training for people who have guns and responsibility for them to use them safely. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So the next question will be Ian first, and then Tracy for response. The March for Our Lives movement has generated a lively discussion about how to deal with school and mass shootings, as well as gun violence in general. Guns and gun violence are an emotional topic, making reasonable discussion difficult. Lack of research also contributes to a lack of common understanding about what drives the violence. All right, is that better? Should I repeat the question?
Yes, please.
All right, so I'll just start over. The March for Our Lives movement has generated a lively discussion about how to deal with school and mass shootings, as well as gun violence in general. Guns and gun violence are an emotional topic for many, making reasonable discussion difficult. Lack of research also contributes to a lack of common understanding about what drives violence. So the question is, with respect to gun violence, what role should Congress and the federal government play, as opposed to actions that should be state or local responsibility? Ian?
So speaking to the emotion of the topic, I think for a lot of us this does hit home. For me, I had an incident this past year where I was walking up back to my house after literally one of the days I was able to put in off the campaign trail in my other work hat role, only to get a call from a robocall from my principal, daughter's principal, saying that there was an incident going and that there's police activity around the school. I get up to within a block radius, and there's a sheriff's car there. Block up from the sheriff's car, I see the SWAT team, and literally between my house and my daughter's elementary school. And there was an active situation going where there was somebody with a domestic assault history and a gun owner basically holed up in an apartment right next to my house. So suddenly this isn't something that I just hear on the news. This is something that's very personal. So what I've done is I've really tried to be sure that I'm on the ground talking with legal responsible gun owners and being sure that we can have a functional dialogue. I participated as a volunteer in the March for Our Lives in Ithaca. I also stood with the students who walked out of their school from Ithaca High School and middle school that day to stand and be sure I was showing support and just hearing them. Also reaching out to legal and responsible gun owners that I know the vast majority are not okay with the way that things are now either, and so I'm having conversations with them to encourage them to make their voice reference in the question was the CDC research into gun violence. So the Dickey Amendment did say not that we couldn't do, or not that the CDC couldn't do research on gun violence. It can, and that was also just echoed in the omnibus bill that was passed in March. But they can't equate it with gun control regulations from there. And so what I would like to see is I'd like to see that research happen, make sure that we can fund it, and really get to the roots of some of the gun violence issues.
Thank you. You have your own.
We're having musical chairs. I do believe in full background checks. These are the things at the federal level. I believe in many of the things that were said. I too went to participate with students, and I encourage people to get involved. But these are the federal level points, which I believe the question is. Full, thorough background checks, no loopholes, enforcement teeth on mandated reporting. I think that this could be a controversial point. I believe in federally funded and trained school resource officers. We learn to listen to students. Guess what the research shows? They want those resource officers. I do believe, however, that a school district can choose either not to have that officer armed or to use that same funding for other type of a resource. But I do believe that this should be federally funded and brought throughout all of our communities. We also need protocols for just getting into the schools. I visited the academy in Cortland, in Corning. the alternative school there. It was a very thorough background. You came up, you rang a bell, there's no other way into that building. You had to go through a direct door. Everyone knew who you were, where you were going. We really should simply make that the protocol for all of our public schools in the United States. And finally, in addition to repealing the Dickey Amendment that Ian just spoke about, I am in favor of repealing the immunity that gun manufacturers have against tort suits. That means that individuals are prohibited from bringing a case into court against a gun manufacturer unless the gun itself is faulty and blows up in your hand or something like that. But to challenge it as we have tobacco or have we automobiles or any other products in our society, individuals don't have an opportunity to challenge as an individual in civil court. Let's let the people decide. That's really a democratic approach. We're a case law society. Let's bring these cases to court. Let's find out what's going to work, what's safety, and what isn't. And if we need to have federal legislation after that, we'll have more evidence upon which to construct it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the next topic is healthcare. So healthcare and access to healthcare has proven to be an important issue in special elections and for the nation as a whole. We're going to explore healthcare impacts in our local area. So Max and then Linda will be the responders to this question. Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hospital in Penn Yan is a typical rural community hospital and employs over 500 people. Rural hospitals depend on Medicare and Medicaid programs for a large portion of their revenue. Medicare and Medicaid funding have been targeted by the current administration and Republicans, including the incumbent New York 23rd District Congressman. The question is, as a representative in Congress, what actions will you take to protect rural health care, not only with respect to the services provided, but considering the jobs that are critical to this area?
Thank you. Medicare and Medicaid have a great deal of effect on real people in this district across all 11 counties. Funding is something that the GOP wants to cut, and Tom Reed has supported those efforts at every turn. That's wrong. There are things that we need to provide as a federal government, and that is certainly our elderly, our special needs children, and people look at Medicaid as just for poor people. It's really for our elderly. You look at how many people will end up in assisted care facilities, perhaps Alzheimer's, for example. About 65% of those people will end up on Medicaid because they run out of funds. So what are we going to do? Turn out our elderly and put them out on the street? I mean, seriously, that's not the kind of society that I want to live in. So let's talk about the rural aspect of this. One of the things that we talk about education is how we are saddling our community with debt, particularly medical training, medical education of all types, be it a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant or a doctor, are very expensive. And there are people that would love to come out to a place that's rural. If they could get part of their educational debt relieved and forgiven. And I think federal programs that would provide that would allow us to address two problems to get a solution for both. And I think I would be certainly in favor of doing that, and I will fight for that. Thank you.
Okay, Linda.
Okay, great. I think it's long overdue time for a single-payer system. Healthcare is a right. It is not a privilege. It's like clean air and water. We depend on it. We can't do anything else if we're not healthy, and all of us will interact with a healthcare system sometime between the time we're born and the time we die. So, there is a bill. It's called HR 676. It addresses the needs of rural hospitals. It covers all Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA system. It simplifies billing. It reduces the cost of health care by simplifying the administrative costs. It also reduces the overall cost of healthcare by providing preventive services. So everything is covered, your eyes, your hearing, teeth, the elderly care that Max was talking about in old age homes, as well as the opioid crisis, clinics that are needed to address that crisis. So in terms of rural communities, I'm very aware of rural communities, having practiced in rural America for over 15, almost 20 years. We need good health care. We need doctors to be attracted to rural communities, and that can be accomplished through service. So that if you have a lot of medical bills, because you've gone to medical school, you can get those paid off by serving in an underserved community. I think that's a great solution for our young people who are facing debt, whether they're nurse practitioners, physicians, and other healthcare workers. We are the only advanced country that has a worse outcome in mortality across the globe. And this is just wrong. This has to stop. We have the funds. We know how to find them. We have the bill. What we need is the will. And I'm ready to go to Congress.
Ian had,
For all platform, which I'll do all I can to get us there, whether it be at the federal level or waivers needed for the New York Health Act. The reality is that a lot of our rural centers, most of our rural centers are very much struggling. And the reality is, in dealing with Medicaid and Medicare, there's supplement programs in addition to just the cost reimbursements that are necessary to the equation. I had a meeting with the VP of Finance from Jones Memorial Hospital in Wellsville, and just digging into their status a bit deeper as an example of a rural center who's having a tough time. It just relays what is the reality for most. They're losing money on each Medicare or Medicaid individual that comes through the door, and that's having to be made up for by the private pay clients. And so we need to ensure that we can do what we can to increase the reimbursement rates for Medicaid, Medicare tied to inflation in every 3 to 5 year period to make sure that it keeps up. We also need to look at the supplement programs, 2 of them that were pointed out, which are critical but get little attention. It's the one is a 340B. It's a Medicare basically drug discount program that those serving poorer and rural centers rely on. And it was on the chopping block to get cut.
you need to wrap it up.
And the other one, which I think is important because it's not just the omnibus funding. We need funding to make these patterns sustainable. I'll talk to you, if I'm going to wrap it up, I'll talk to you about the other one afterward if you're interested, but there's more details to consider.
Okay, we're looking for a little bit quicker on these items.
Well, I'll cede most of my minute to Ian
Okay.
to make up for it. And simply say that I too am for a single payer system. I'd be delighted to talk afterwards if anyone wanted to hear more about my thoughts. I have spent time analyzing how it is we can get a bill that will actually get out of having been read into the record and into committee and before the floor. Talk about what my ideas are there. I'll do that in another juncture. Thank you.
Okay. All right. The next poll is growing. There are competing theories about what the causes are and what to do about the crisis. This administration and Congress have directed a few actions, but there has been no comprehensive strategy to guide efforts at the national and local levels. What do you think are the biggest factors contributing to the opioid crisis, and what do you think Congress can do about it?
There are people in this audience, Bill, who have been personally affected by the opioid crisis. And my heart goes out to you. I know some of you, I don't know all of you. I too have been affected. There are 3 people that I have known in the last 5 years who have fallen as a result of this. I think number 1, we have to have a sense of outrage about it in this room and in Congress. These are chemicals, these are products that we've known for 200 years are highly addictive. In the 19th century, there were opium wars fought. The British fought to make China continue to sell and consume opium because they wanted the business. China didn't want it because they knew what it was doing to its population. How we, as a society, and the medical profession in particular, got hoodwinked into believing that these were not going to be addictive and not create the crisis we have is something that Congress could do something about. Let's have hearings and find out how we got into this situation. Depending on what study you look at, 60,000 people, give or take, died just last year from this problem. 200,000 people in this country have died since these drugs have been pushed out in the mid-90s by our pharmaceutical companies. So we need to correct this problem. We also need to find out how we got hoodwinked in the first place. Hearings in Congress, number one. Number two, I thoroughly encourage every form of municipality with an attorney general, from local municipality, county, state, and absolutely the federal government. Let's go after the pharmaceutical companies that put us in this condition and get the money for rehabilitation. Period, stop, end of sentence. This is something that we have done with tobacco. We have done it when we've had other kinds of crises like this, although frankly, nothing compares to this, in my view. That is exactly what I suggest Congress does about it. If attorney generals can't do it, let's pass legislation to fix it. Thank you.
So, Yates County, I think second highest incident of opioid ER-related visits, as well as overdoses in the Finger Lakes. The vast majority of those come from individuals who had prior legal prescriptions for the opioids. It's actually a vast majority, between 60 and 75%. So if we're looking at the primary causes of what's going on here in your home county, which is not an outlier, then we have to look at that equation. And so something that we could do is make sure that we really are focusing on the physician and the patient education. If they're coming from legal prescriptions, then we need to be pretty clear that these are the ramifications and consequences of the use. I think we're mired in so much, dysfunction right now, and just so many things being broken, so much negativity each day in the news cycle. We do forget that there are a lot of individuals in Congress that still are doing good work. So one of a few of the points that would really address opioids were actually supported in the omnibus bill that was passed in March. Despite the whims of probably President Trump or Representative Reed, funding was actually sent in the direction that it should have. So if we're really looking at what would make a dent, just so you all know, here are the things that should have gone through and did go through. We had to the causative nature of the opioid abuse. We had increased opioid response program funding by $2 billion. We had increased funding to NIH. I think we need alternatives that are less addictive to the opioids we have on the market now, and the NIH and the researchers need the funding to look into that and bring those to market. We have increased funding for substance abuse prevention, and most important to our district is quite a bit of funding going toward rural centers and recovery. So I'm thankful for the congressmen and women who are doing great work, and looking forward to those solutions.
We'll give everybody an opportunity since this is a great go ahead and
I'd like to say, first of all, we need to restore economic opportunity to the district. That makes us more vulnerable, I think, as a district, and that's a start. But we need to hold Big Pharma accountable. They knew very well what they were doing. They knew these things were highly addictive and not very effective for pain control. And we need to also look at a changing of the paradigm. Instead of sentences that are mandated for nonviolent crimes, we should have alternatives that actually provide treatment and alternatives to going to prison. We also need to destigmatize opioids and treat it like a disease. And to do that, we also need to have resources. Residential programs, more support for therapists and caseworkers and judges and parole officers to make this, turn this around and put people back in their communities where they can raise their families and be contributing members of society, and I will work for that.
Okay, so I agree with my colleagues, more or less. I think that we need to first destigmatize this. If we destigmatize opioid addiction, people will come to treatment sooner, and then they'll have a better chance of recovery. And then we need to really look at prevention. We really need to study every illness that affects our society, and this is an illness. So what is the underlying cause of the opioid addiction? Is it just the pharmaceuticals? Plenty of people take opioids and don't get addicted. So what is it? I believe we should know that it is not just the availability of drugs, but it's poverty, depression, and social isolation. Poverty happens to be the underlying cause of most illnesses. And I think if we in this district can get people to work, feel like they're part of a community, then we'll go a long way in helping solve this opioid crisis right here in our district. In addition, we should think about harm reduction clinics and treatment with a drug called Suboxone. And there's lots of evidence now mounting that this can help someone slowly come off their opioid addiction. Thank you.
Great. All right, so the next topic area is agriculture and people. This topic explores the nexus between agriculture and immigration, agriculture being an important economic contributor to our nation. And in fact, this nexus has actually been played out this week with the Farm Bill and DACA and all that sort of stuff. So that was interesting. So Linda, actually you're first, and then Ian on this question. New York 23rd Congressional District has a large agricultural industry that must have access to affordable and reliable labor in order to stay operational. Many of our vineyards, wineries, and farms depend on the availability of foreign and migrant workers, but the current visa program, in particular the H-2A program, does not adequately meet their labor needs. What changes to the visa program would you propose to ensure that it serves local producers, farmers' needs?
Okay, so the H-2A visa program, I was just speaking to a farmer the other and then the harvesting time is gone. So by the time they get the visa, the work that needed to be done is over. I think we need to simplify this. I don't see why we can't have a program where people are given work permits in a short period of time to fill the needs of the farmers, dairy farmers here, and other farmers. I'd also like to address the issue of agriculture in terms of grants and low-cost loans to family farms, incentives to develop energy independence, promote conservation, and the use of biomass fuels for moderate-sized dairy farmers. We also need to think about new products that can grow here, like hemp. The problem with hemp right now is there are too many regulatory laws stopping the transport of hemp across state lines. And of course, we need to invest in high-speed internet. We need to reevaluate property taxes for farmers. I met a dairy farmer who land tax was astronomical because of new building that was occurring along the lake. So we need to give it to the farmers if we want them to continue.
Thank you.
I think one of the first conversations that I had out as a candidate was a little over a year ago. Rich Stewart, thankful for, brought me out to the Hunt Hill Vineyards to talk to the owners out there. And at that point, honestly, I wasn't really, I think, ready to be out there as a candidate. I think that we've all come a long, long way in terms of forming the connections out in the district, learning more about policy, and really just becoming better candidates. And so I'm thankful for the opportunity. But one of the things that came up at that first meeting was their primary concern was the labor and H-2A program. For their vantage point, I believe their daughter, Suzanne, was working more intently at a guest worker program. And they had some pieces of what that would look like, and I think they were getting very little response from Representative Reed, and they were going to work on a revision. And so what I'd really like to be on the ground further, working with the farmers, whether it be dairy farmers or vineyard owners or whoever it might be, to talk about what that looks like. Is it because the process is too laborious, is it takes too long, as Linda mentioned? Is it the cost of transportation getting them here? Do some end up being exploitative? Do we end up getting more undocumented immigrants just because the process isn't efficient enough? I think that there are various things that we can do. Representative Stefanik actually introduced a piece of legislation regarding H-2A in the 2017 Congressional cycle that I believe Representative Reed actually co-sponsored. And it was just making the H-2A program a bit more, I think, accessible and bringing it online and trying to make some improvements. But I think it was still far from what the Hunt's vision was for the guest worker program that they were envisioning. So I look forward to the opportunity of being on the ground, taking the problems that exist with H-2A, and seeing if we can improve them with the guest worker program that they have in mind. Thanks.
Just 1 minute. Well, just last week I was talking with of Anthony Road, and that's been part of a conversation I've had with many wine makers in this area. My aunt and uncle were charter members of the American Wine Society, so I'm very familiar with that community. And they were sharing with me about how a generation ago, the women or even kids on their spring break would come and tie grapes and so forth in the spring and get things going. And for whatever changes have occurred in our economy and society and culture, that faded as migrants were coming in to take those positions. And only now, because of the stringency of the Trump administration trying to enforce a law that is anachronistic and no longer fits the needs of our society, we are in the crisis that we are in. And that can be a general statement, but I'm talking about the people who are in our community who suffered that crisis. I'm talking about Ann and John Martini. I'm talking about the vineyards. I'm talking about Laura and Rick Pedersen, who have a vegetable farm up in Ontario County. And I am talking about just about every dairy farmer that I have spoken to, who is dearly concerned that in any moment ICE can show up, take their laborers, and they are out of business. That's not the way to run a country. It's not the way to support our farmers. We can do better than that.
Is she gonna time? Okay. Time consuming. Every year they have to reapply, and when they do, they have to confirm that they're not displacing American workers, and I totally get that. But if there's such a gap of workers in the United States that want to do it versus migrant, we should allow them to skip a year if there's a big difference, and do a sliding scale. Also, dairy farms are not served well by H-2A because it's a 12-month requirement. It's not a seasonal requirement, and we need to fix that. Thank you.
All right, the next question, Max, actually you're first, and then Tracy. Representative Reed has supported the president's policies that have undermined the basic human rights of many Americans, including those practicing non-Christian religions, plus individuals, and women's health care. How do you see these policies impacting our district, and what changes could the House of Representatives make that you would support?
Thank you for that question. This is a personal one for me. I have a daughter who's a trans woman. For those of you who don't know what that is, that means that every day she has to wonder if she is going to be accosted, or there's violence, or bias. Fortunately for her, she lives in New York, And there is an executive order, so to speak, that Governor Cuomo has signed, but it's only one administration away from being gone. So when she goes to other states, that's a problem. And it is part of our political environment, and I think it's fostered by the leadership, not only of the country, but also our representative, who basically rubber stamps everything that's done by the president. We have a problem here that it's a refusal to embrace diversity. And I mean diversity of religious beliefs, gender, sexual preference, and race, all those things. I want to live in a society that embraces all of that, because that's what makes our country strong. I really believe that. So, the other thing I'm concerned about is Tom Reed. Oh, I wanted to give you an example. I was speaking to a gentleman who runs an engineering firm in Tompkins County. And he said, I am very concerned because many of the people who work for me or with me are Muslim. And they're considering leaving the country because they don't feel welcome. I think that's a travesty. That's not what America's all about. And I will work in Congress to make sure that this is a national thing. This isn't just state by state, but we embrace all type of people and allow them to be who they want to be. Thank you.
I cut my political teeth on farm union organizing and on civil rights. I think of myself as a child of that generation, a little later than some of my older cousins who participated in the anti-Vietnam War and civil rights movement, but certainly by the time I was in college in the 1970s, it was part of my politics, and as someone who identifies, I guess, as bisexual, that it was also part of my life. I was probably moved more than any other issue with the election of President Trump to get involved in politics and civil rights. And I was appalled specifically last summer during the Charlottesville event that Representative Reed could not so much as squeeze out a tweet in support of civil rights and in support of the people who were attacked by those who came originally with the neo-Nazi groups to march. But I think that this movement, from a legal point of view, I could say in Congress I would like to add to Title VII of our Civil Rights Act of 1964 provisions for transgendered and same-sex or LGBTQ populations, and that is my congressional response. But I want to speak about something that I think is much deeper on this subject. There is fear in this country that grips us with every disappointment people face. The lack of health care, the lack of good education, food insecurity, housing insecurity. We're talking about all of those issues. Maybe one of the reasons why guns is so important is because it feels like it's going to empower you in the face of feeling as if you don't have any power in a society where fear has a grip. We must show courage to this fear. And I promise you, that's the kind of leadership I want to bring to this district.
So you know, well, everybody's distracted by our chief leader. I can't even say his name. That administration that took office in January of 2017 has no less than 34 actions, rollbacks of protection, or changes in policy that have either protected against discrimination or openly supported discrimination against LGBTQ people and women. This goes across 8 different agencies: the Department of Education, Justice, Housing and Urban Development, Department of Health and Human Services, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the State Department, and the Census Bureau. This is what's going on while our media entertains us with the shenanigans of this deplorable man in office. In addition to him, through the actions and orders of Betsy DeVoe, women are less safe on college campuses. Ben Carson has made the housing department less safe for people of color and transgender and LGBTQ people. When any of us is denied privileges and protections afforded by our system of law, we are all in danger. So not only do we have to stand up in Congress, but you all should be aware that when anyone is in danger, we are all in danger of losing our privileges and our safety.
I'm just going to pause here to just ask the candidates. We're running ahead of schedule. So instead of the 30 seconds, how about if we do like a 2 to 3 minute closing for each of you, just so you can have it in your mind so that you get ready. All right, so the next topic is the environment. While trash is certainly an important local topic, the committee didn't think that Congress had much to do with the issue. Therefore, we will focus on water quality and climate change. So the first question will be Max and then Ian. Water quality is a big issue in the Finger Lakes. Concerns include drinking water quality, recreational use, eliminating invasive species and controlling hazardous algal blooms, among others. The Environmental Protection Agency has been eliminating regulations that protect water quality. In addition, the administration proposes slashing federal environmental program budgets, such as the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. What can a democratically controlled Congress do to restore a federal commitment to clean water? Max.
We heard about draining the swamp. Anybody remember that? How about let's appoint a fox for every hen house? That's more like it, isn't it? So as I look at what's going on, it is of great concern because the executive branch has what responsibility? To enforce the laws, right? So unless it's a law, they have some latitude, and that's of concern. You would think that someone who's in Environmental Protection Agency would try to protect the environment, but that's not something that necessarily follows with this administration. So what the Congress has to do, unfortunately, in this case, is actually make laws that they have to enforce. And unfortunately, we can't assume that just calling it the Environmental Protection Agency means that that's what the guy's going to do. Because quite frankly, virtually everybody that's been appointed for all these cabinets has spent the rest of their life trying to dismantle, conduct lawsuits against, and destroy the elements of whatever the agency is. That's a shame. But we need a Congress that will stand up, not be a rubber stamp. And as you can tell, we have a rubber stamp in the form of Tom Reed. And we need to get rid of him and replace him with any of us. And I guarantee it will do a better job. Thank you for your part in making that happen. Thank you.
So speaking of the man in charge there, we can focus on that, and it's really depressing. And we can be in that spot. And this is where all of us come in as congressional representatives. So I'll talk a lot about the omnibus bill in some of these topics just because it's so huge. That's why it's the omnibus bill, right? And so some of the things regarding water quality, I was so thankful for what did make it through. You had President Trump and cabinets proposing 60% cuts to water infrastructure, maybe 38% to state and tribal pollution standards. But what you saw was really Congress coming through and not going with that, and really upholding things that are critical to our district. We live at the border of the Great Lakes and into the Finger Lakes, representing 90%, I think, of the fresh water, drinking water to our nation. The world, huge. right? And so we saw projects like the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, $300 million project. I think there's 418 different projects across New York, and bringing together 11 different agencies, which is just an amazing program doing what it needs to protect our waterways and our drinking supply. And that was something that was on the chopping block to Trump, but Congress upheld it, protected the funding at $300 million. We had the increase, I think, by $600 million water infrastructure funding. My daughters haven't been able to drink from their school's water supply, I think, in over 3 years. And it's unfortunate for those that were not, or that were drinking from supply prior, because our lead levels were too high. So instead, we're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for bottled water, as opposed to really getting to the root of the issue. I'm thankful that Congress is on the front line, that we'll be on that front line too. And the other piece of the equation is ag. With the Farm Bill here, the conservation stewardship programs, and some of the others that were on the chopping block that would also protect water quality, I'll do all I can to be an advocate and fight for those. So let's do that.
At the federal level, I think that we need to pass the anti-fracking bill. Period, stop, end the sentence. The water quality issue, I'm very glad that Governor Cuomo has been able to send $65 billion our way all throughout this district and other areas of the state to address. However, we're going to need an appropriate administration in the presidency, executive, and then an appropriate person in the Environmental Protection Agency in order to marry the federal funds and attention that needs to be brought to this issue with the state funds that we're now receiving. So in other words, we need a blue wave and we need a Democratic executive so that we can get the right representation in the EPA. Finally, there is the issue that I want to speak briefly to, and that is what we've called it over a series of forums, treating this district like a dump. We need to be having comprehensive planning. Did you hear that flat A Rochester accent? Comprehensive planning in order to be sure that the least able to defend themselves municipalities within this district don't get hit by these external entities that want to come in and set up an incinerator or set up a dump. We need to fix Great Valley at the tune of $6 billion, but gosh darn it, let's do it and let's get it fixed. And then let's have a comprehensive plan that protects all of us, not just the ones that have more money to afford it. Thank you.
All right, Tracy and then Linda on the next question. China has an aggressive plan to reduce its fossil fuel use, improve energy efficiency, and become a leader in low-carbon technology. Meanwhile, the administration has moved to de-emphasize low-carbon energy generation and energy efficiency, as well as reduce funding for renewable technology R&D. How can a low-carbon economy benefit citizens of the 23rd District, and what can a democratically controlled Congress do to help the U.S. thrive in the future low-carbon economy?
President Trump's policies are wrong. There's no question about it. I am a patriot. I believe in the United States, but I will share with you that the People's Republic of China have a progressive vision on a number of fronts that we would do well to consider and think about making the appropriate changes ourselves. I know this in the area of my professional expertise in terms of internet and internet policy. Very briefly, let me say we've got 17 administrative agencies in Washington that do something about the internet. People's Republic of China has one. They get it. They get this is where 21st century communications, commerce lies. They get if you're going to do proactive policy, you have to have a centralized way, a lens through which you can do it. We are squandering so much innovation and so much ability by this failure to put ourselves together and continue to just live with turf. I think that we have the same problem with fossil fuels in this following sense. We must invest in renewable energies. I am for the Off Fossil Fuels Act. It has a chart. It's aggressive chronologically, but it gives us a start. of how we might begin to de-incentivize fossil fuels and to incentivize renewable energies. We must have legislation like that to get us on track and get us moving, and when we do that, we can then give the proper tax breaks and so forth for those kinds of renewable energies. The tariff on solar panels, for example, is one of the president's whimsical mistakes, and that is the least I can say about it. It is tremendously bad policy, as so much else is revealed in his policy on tariffs around the world and with the People's Republic in particular. But I think that in this area of fossil fuels, let's be honest about it, he, President Trump, like Tom Reed, gets all kinds of money from the fossil fuel industry simply to do their bidding, and that, if we want to have a world for our children going forward, has got to stop.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so I think the question was, how can a low carbon economy benefit the people in this district, right? Is that right? Yeah. Okay, so first of all, we can talk about what has been happening since the Commander-in-Chief got in his chair. They've repealed so many rules that put a clamp on the oil and gas industry, so that the royalties that the oil and gas they suspended the Bureau of Land Management Waste Prevention rule. The EPA canceled the oil and gas methane information collection request, and it goes on and on and on. But what about this district? I think we have an opportunity here for a win-win situation, and that is for jobs and for alternative infrastructure plan. So the Trump administration and Republicans have a plan to put our tax money up against private money and repair our infrastructure. That will incur what I call an investment from private industry we will be paying for, as we will have to put tolls on our roads and on our water, because anytime private industry invests, they want a return on that investment. What I propose is a direct public investment, giving $2 trillion over 10 years for public transportation, water and sewer systems, clean energy jobs, high-speed access, Veterans Hospital, a plan of Buy America and hire veterans. It will create 2.5 million jobs in the first year. Now, this is countrywide. It will be paid by closing the corporate tax loopholes. This is what has been called the 21st century New Deal for jobs. So it's a win-win. We train our workers in industry to address our 21st century energy needs with clean energy, and we give up our dependence on fossil fuels. There is a plan to do this by 2050 and to have 85% of this state fossil fuel free by 2035.
Want a minute? Keep it to the point.
I will. Tompkins County has, I think, 250 green energy jobs that will actually be jeopardized by that tariff that the president placed on those photovoltaic cells. So the margin that they were using to make these successful products actually jeopardizes those 250 jobs. Had that not been done, we may have been able to multiply this or spread this concept across the district, and I think we still could, but we need to have a thoughtful, coordinated, cohesive economic policy, which so far we don't. Thank you.
So our current representative, I think, often makes the case for local jobs, local manufacturing, being for people in our economies. And to this point, I don't know what it looks like if we don't commit to a low carbon future. For those of you who may not know, an entity like Dresser Rand in Wellsville just announced that by the end of 2019, they'll lose a couple hundred, all of their jobs in that plant, which will be catastrophic for the economic anchor of that community. And their parent company Siemens sees the writings on the wall and is going more in the direction of alternative and non-fossil fuel energies. And I'm going to do, and I imagine we all will, to do all that we can to be sure that our manufacturers in our district isn't left holding the bag when those jobs are gone. We need to be proactive. We need to work for the all-factor. We need to look at programs like the Solutions Project, which moves toward renewables, and what would that look like? And if we could get there, it would bring our entire district to full employment with living wage jobs for the next 40 years. So what does it look like if we don't go there?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, national security and trade. Potential trade wars and military conflicts can have significant short and long-term impacts on people in our district, not to mention the country as a whole. So the first question will be Ian and then Linda. And we realize that things have been in flux in this area for quite a bit since these questions have been written. The current administration recently imposed protectionist tariffs on many types of imports, spurring retaliatory tariffs from our trading partners. Some of these retaliatory tariffs are targeted against U.S. agricultural products, such as soybeans, dairy, grain, and even wine. In addition, some international customers are also beginning to turn to other suppliers because of the uncertainty of the current trade agreements. What, in your view, are the benefits and costs of globalization, trade, and tariffs, and what can you do in Congress to advance your views? Ian.
So what I really like to see is us globally look into being sure that we're backing up fair trade models as opposed to just free trade. I think there are examples from across our district where a globalized model of commerce and pertaining to free trade has worked for certain companies. For example, Corning Inc., with their Gorilla Glass program, moved that manufacturing facility and jobs over to be next to the Samsung factory. And the reason they had to do it was they manufactured these huge sheets for the Gorilla Glass, and they literally take it on a conveyor belt from the Corning factory across the factory where it's then processed. I think there are reasons where a globalized model makes sense, but there are also a lot of race to the bottom situations where we're focused on free as opposed to fair trade. We've seen a lot of our manufacturing lost to automation, but also offshoring. When we look at the agriculture sector, I think at 48%, I believe, of our agricultural exports are tied to the NAFTA equation. So we have to be very sensitive on how we look at the trade agreements that we have. The impact of the tariffs. I think that it was very effective because President Trump and others were able to put it out there as an us versus them issue. It's something that he's become very good at, unfortunately, which is something that divides and galvanizes a population. You look at the steel tariff as an example. Well, one of the manufacturers just outside of our district and has a processing plant in our district is Nucor. They're one of the biggest steel manufacturers in the nation, and one of the ones that was making, I think, the loudest stink about the steel tariff equation. Well, the reality is that Nucor, in their manufacturing process, eliminated roughly 9 out of 10 jobs just on based on being a more efficient, automated process. So we can talk about all the jobs that we're losing, but I think it's ignoring the reality in this case, which was automation. I need a lot more than 2 minutes to talk about steel tariffs and agriculture, and my time's up. So I would love to talk to you all further.
I think we do live in a globalized economy, and we need to recognize that. And I think that it's good that we trade around the world. In the past, there have been tariff wars. Maybe some of you have heard of the Smoot-Hawley Act, and that might have been responsible for the worsening of our depression. So I don't think any war is good. I think we need to cooperate with our neighbors around the world. But I think in terms of trade, we have to understand the difference between free trade and fair trade. It's really unfair when manufacturers use cheap labor and are not subject to any environmental laws, any regulations to help their workforce around the world. That's why these companies are moving around the world to exploit other people. And I think that we need to address that. And then it will become fair. It will become fair to us and fair to people around the world. So that's my feeling on fair and free trade. In terms of tariffs, I think that, again, a tariff war is not a good idea. I think it's a very complicated issue. And like Ian said, some people in this country would benefit and others would not. And it is being served up to us by this administration as yet another divisive measure. So again, it will take a long time and a lot of economists to sit down and sort through this issue. But those are my brief comments for now. Thank you.
Well, we've got another question in the area, but if there's something specific on trade, do you have something different or
Yes, just one aspect, because I agree with what my colleagues have said in their remarks, but I do want to comment on the globalization. This is a reality the United States federally has not faced. Because I'm in the area of cybersecurity, I have been a little bit on the front line of it. I mentioned in my opening remarks that I created a cybersecurity certificate program. I'm going to talk about it very, very briefly as an example of what we should be doing to retool our workers who have been displaced by the manufacturing that is leaving our district and our country. This program was 9 months. It was a lot of intensive work for the students who, thank you, participated in it, but they were able to leave and get jobs in Western Massachusetts, an area not unlike our district, agricultural at its base, at $60,000, $70,000. There is a legislation, the Workforce Opportunity Act, that did allow some of the people who had been laid off from positions to use funds to pay the tuition for a program like this. We need to expand that, however, to not just people who have been laid off in a certain amount of time and so forth, but to all of our workforce that needs to be retooled. We can't simply keep imagining that this is going to stop, that outsourcing will never affect our district. It affects us every day. We must address it proactively, and I do believe education is the key as to how to go about it. Thank you.
thank you.
Just a quick one then.
All right.
As far as globalization is concerned, it's going to happen. However, people in Congress don't have to exacerbate the problem. The tax reform package actually encourages offshoring of jobs, and it provides corporations the ability to bring back money at a much reduced rate, and it actually will increase that offshoring of jobs. We need to connect their benefit, if we're going to give them a benefit like that, with increasing jobs, increasing infrastructure here in this country, and actually improving workers' conditions here in exchange for those very valuable and expensive benefits. Thank you.
Okay, our last topical question, Tracy and then Max will be the responders. The world faces a number of challenges, such as transnational terrorism, climate change, wars, governance, there's corruption in failed states, cybercrime, disease, and poverty that cause disruptions for America and Americans at home and abroad. What do you see as the top 1 or 2 national security challenges, and describe what you see as the United States' role in addressing them?
Well, I think the 3 principal ones are nuclear warfare and cybersecurity and terrorism. We have been working in a very odd fashion, I think. I speak now as a historian. I actually cannot think of another time in which we have conducted diplomacy as we are conducting ourselves now under this president. And the decimation of the State Department is a good example of that. but so is doing serious diplomacy through tweets, and so is trying to address some of these very serious problems with the kind of sophomoric approach that our administration has taken. I'll talk a little bit about cybersecurity in some detail. I mentioned before that there's such a distribution of authority and responsibility for cybersecurity in this country throughout our federal agencies. That is not how you do national defense. And I think that if our administration is incapable of recognizing how and in what ways we are putting ourselves at risk not to address that point, then you must have a representative in Congress who understands it and is willing to stand up and say we need to pass a law in Congress that is going to reorganize to our benefit how we manage national defense under the cybersecurity in particular. Insofar as that it is part of our national defense, it really needs to be preferenced within our Defense Department. We cannot take the time in a real crisis to have to check in with 17 agencies to find out how we're going to respond if in fact the Russians, who've probably touched every single computer in this country, ever were to go ahead and pull the plug on what they know how to do. Quick example,
No,
farmers here.
Time's up.
All right, very sorry. I'll tell you later.
When we talk about national security, there are certainly a lot to talk about. Certainly can't begin to cover it all in 2 minutes. But I will say this. When we look at Bolton becoming a national security advisor, someone who has repeatedly said that it's good policy to just go in and take out a nuclear facility, whether it's in North Korea or Iran. That's dangerous. It's short-sighted. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Netanyahu and the president spoke about 2.5 months ago. And shortly thereafter, they, meaning Israel, declassified a top secret operation where they attacked Syria's nuclear facility in 2008. And I believe that that was intentionally done to actually make it appear to the American public that this is a reasonable policy option. And I disagree. Because Israel, in the write-up that I saw in the New York Times, actually specifically said they were very conscious about the fact that they were going to attack it before it went hot. We're not in that situation with North Korea for certain. And this is not something you should do without thinking about it. And I don't believe he's thought about the second, third, and fourth order consequences. So diplomacy, we have like 60% of a diplomatic team. That's not enough. We need to do diplomacy first, because our sons and daughters are in the military, and we need to use diplomacy first. Pulling out of the Iran deal is dangerous. Why would anybody negotiate with any country that does not honor its word? And the rest we'll have to talk about later, because I've got 1 second. Thank you for your attention.
Glenda?
So in terms of national security, I think there are 3 things we need to worry about, and in this order: the short term, the medium term, and the long term. In the short term, we must restrict any president from having the right to effect a first nuclear strike. There is in the House right now a bill restricting the First Use of Nuclear Weapons Act of 2017, and this prevents any president from having that unilateral power without the consent of Congress. Secondly, I think climate change in the immediate term is a tremendous threat to our national security. And thirdly, in the long term, income inequality will make us a very insecure country from within. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that's our 5 topics. We actually gave the candidates a bonus question. And so we'd originally talked about just 1 minute, but I think what we ought to do is time 2 minutes for each response, because it's difficult to cover the question actually in 1 minute. So here's the bonus question. When elected, what House committees or subcommittees would you seek to serve on and why? And so we're just going to go down in order and start with Linda.
Okay, so in reviewing this question, I realized that in each committee, there are many subcommittees, and these often bridge other committees. So it's a very complicated process there in the committee system in Congress. So I picked 3 of them: Science, Space, and Technology, the Subcommittee on the Environment. There are 3 vacancies on that committee. 1 is waiting for me. I am a scientist in addition to being a physician. I am the only scientist here. And there is only 1 other scientist in Congress right now, and that's a male physicist. The second would be the House Appropriations Committee. That's a tough committee to get on. And that covers the Subcommittee of Agriculture, Rural Development, and the Food and Drug Administration, as well as Labor, Health and Human Services, Commerce, and Justice Science. And the third committee that I'd like to serve on is Energy and Commerce, and the subcommittee there would be, again, Health and the Environment. So I think for obvious reasons, those would be the committees that would most suit my background and my abilities. Thank you.
Obviously, I have some expertise in national security, and that might be a logical thing to do. But my point is not to show off or anything like that. It's really to represent this district. So I'm looking at things where I can make a difference for this district. So agriculture would absolutely be something I would be interested in, and I have some background, and I have some family in my son. My youngest son is a farmer, and I'm very interested in helping our small farms and our vineyards and dairy farms. Also, I would like to be on Ways and Means or Appropriations for obvious reasons, because the money that comes to the district may be influenced by those 2, and they're very powerful committees, and I could make a difference there. And oversight and government reform, because ultimately, it's not just passing laws or starting programs. It's looking into how we can make sure that every tax dollar is used to its best effect. And decisions that are made by Congress are often just what they can do to stay in office. I call it administrative cowardice. Anybody know what sequestration is? That's where you do your best on a budget, and then they say, you take off 10% for operations, 10% for training, and 10% for modernization, and see how that goes, suboptimally. But what it did for my son, who's in the Air Force, it delayed by a year his ability to finish pilot training because we didn't have enough money for fuel. And that's hundreds of man-years of pilots that we've given up as a country because of cowardice. And I will not be a coward. Thank you.
Energy and commerce, and as Linda mentioned, sub of health and the environment. I think that there's so much under that umbrella that can be done. If we look at some of the larger threats, whether it be environmental threats, whether it be the focus and where appropriations are into the energy sectors, whether it be looking into healthcare. I'll do all I can again to work for Medicare for all and a single payer system. Currently, that's where HR 676 is. And then also agriculture. Really, the identity of our district is largely rooted in agriculture. I grew up on the eastern border of Lancaster County, surrounded by Amish farms, and that's part of where I come from as well. I don't have all the answers. I need a whole lot more relationships, discussions, talk on policy, but I would love to fight for the farmers in our district. I think some of the most personal connections that I've had so far have been on those fronts. I mean, people struggling, multi-generation farmers, vineyard owners, really at wit's end with the way that things are. And really they need somebody that's going to fight for them. You see the consolidation along monopolies and larger industrial entities, and the little guy really struggling. Me as a small business owner, I've been thankful to work for and start 4 small businesses in upstate New York, but I'm literal small business. You know, when I look at the consolidation, the automation, the changes in the commerce, it's tough for us as small business owners. And so, again, I'll do all I can to work for those aims. Thanks.
I, like my colleagues, am interested in ways and means to correct the wrongs that Tom Reed has made while he has occupied those seats. I too have fallen in love with agriculture. I grew up in a city, but I really have taken to heart the needs, concerns, and what they do for all of us in a way that has in fact surprised me. And so I would be honored to be on such a committee where I can help them through their challenges at this point. Related to my background, I suppose infrastructure would be a good one. I do believe, and it was my first insight as I thought about getting into politics here, without high-speed internet broadband deployment throughout this district, we will never get into the 21st century. We will not revive our jobs. We will not revive our workforce. And I've had to do a lot with the FCC and the work that I've done over the years. I have been down in Washington. I've been working on net neutrality since 2004 and have worked actively with Congress in terms of some of the special interests that higher education fought against to be sure that they didn't get their way in the last Higher Education Opportunity Act that affected internet aspects. But probably the committee I could be most useful in terms of my background is education in the workforce. And like the internet as the technical part, I firmly believe that we must revive our education in this country in order to get us moving again. That includes looking at equitability in K through 12, in 11 through 20, we need trade, vocational certification programs, and federal support for all of that. And finally, at the 20+ level, we need to have 0%
that I talked about in my opening speech. It's going to require not me, not my colleagues, but all of you. And what I'm seeing in this journey so far is an incredible outpouring of civic involvement and interest. But we can't let this go. We have to continue it through the primary, through November, and in the years to follow. Because we can stand up here and say we want to do this, that, and the other thing. We want to pass all these bills. We have all these ideas. But none of that can happen unless the constituents come out and demand what is rightfully theirs. That is a government that is there to protect and empower the citizenry. I could go on and on about what my issues are, but I really see just one single issue that intersects all others, and that is healthcare. It's not the only issue, but it's a central issue. And whether we're talking about the economy or jobs or the
to my family, but to yours and this country. I believe this is the highest stakes election in my memory. And regardless of who wins the primary, we all have to be committed to making sure that that primary victor, whoever it is, wins. And it's going to take work on all our parts, because I guarantee you, Tom Reed will not go quietly into the good night. And we want to give him a send-off, don't we? So I would say this, we're going to have to do a couple things here. First of all, we need to join hands, whether we're progressive or Democrats. Let's just say we're Democrats who are progressive, or Democrats who are Democrats. Whatever it is, whatever it takes to come together. But that is something that we really have so many things in common that we need to move forward together. Secondly, we certainly have to, how many people know somebody who doesn't do politics, who doesn't vote at all? How about only people that do it, vote only for a presidential election? So what I'm going to ask you to do is talk to them, bring them up, and get a relationship so that you can make sure they get to the polls, because it's incredibly important. And last but not least, we're going to have to actually turn some Republicans who ordinarily vote Republican for Democrats. And that's where I believe a military experience, I can talk and continue a conversation that would otherwise end without running as a Democrat. And I want to do that for you. Thank you for your attention.
So through this whole process, I've met a lot of amazing people, had a lot of amazing inspirational discussions. I think one of the most impactful, the one I cherish most, was a couple months ago, having the opportunity to connect with and chat with Emil Houghton in his living room. There was a congressional representative that from all I hear, individuals just really loved Emil Houghton. I'm sure there were some that didn't. But by and large, he was somebody that was respectful. He didn't think in partisan lines. He was honorable, he was accomplished, he was wise. Right? And just being there, I think connecting with him was a highlight for me. And you know, this is something where we're so divided right now in communities and ideology and in thought and communication. And here's me meeting with a Republican, which is literally the highlight of maybe this whole journey so far. I want to do all that I can to bring that back to the table. We've lost that, I think, too much in our politicians. They are divided, they are partisan. Maybe we've got districts that are gerrymandered, so they don't have to appeal to a certain segment of the population. They really just vote on behalf of the special interests and the lobbies. And at some point, we need to collectively say that this isn't working. We need to go back to a time where it wasn't a bad thing to be a politician, where politicians were genuine, where they were honest, they were trustworthy. And sure, there's been a lot of politicians in the course of time that weren't that way, but that we've been guided and led by those who have been. I really want to represent an honest alternative to bring that back. Based on my roots, who I'm comfortable with, I have the capacity to resonate, reach across the aisles, be confident in those discussions. And I'm really, again, thankful for all of you being here. I would be grateful for your support. Let's do this together. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, there we go. Yeah. When I purchased a home here in Yates County in 2003, you could have knocked me over with a feather to tell me that there were progressive people in this community. And the surprise has so been to my enrichment and benefit, because I have found an amazing community of people who come from all different walks of life, but have in common the desire to work as a community on the challenges that we face. And now that we have really been with our backs against the wall, look how you have all risen up. Look how we are coming together, and look how we are learning to reach across the aisle, to talk to each other, to have a conversation that's about what's really at stake and not just about the inflammatory words and the immediate knee-jerk. We must continue that march as we go forward. We must reach out to our neighbors, no matter what their political stripe. It's really not about Republican or Democrat. It's about working and middle-class people, what they need, what they want, what they deserve, and what we can get if we come together and begin to work as a community that cares about each other and not just some ideal or political rhetoric. I want to thank you for your engagement. You are what democracy looks like. I am very grateful that you, over the years, have been absorbing me into your community, and I sure hope I can earn your trust and earn your vote on June the 26th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, candidates, and audience, can you please give them all a round of applause? Thank you, the audience, for coming out today. I think it's a great showing, and I really appreciate you paying attention. I want to express our appreciation to the Denver Fire Department for having the venue for us today. You know we did pay for it. Special thanks to the Yates County Democratic Committee organizers who for putting on this great event. So they did a great job. Maybe a round of applause for them. Close with just a few reminders. First, fill out the straw poll ballot and I can have your attention, please. Eddie Sundquist was not able to be here, but his campaign staff is here, and they're at the table over at the corner here. So